Hi there, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I'm doing another installment of the freelancer Q&A series that I do here in the Circle community, and then also subsequently on our YouTube channel. This is the penultimate episode I will be doing from here in this location in Florida. It's been a lovely winter here in Florida, but it is getting hot, and we are going to head back north in a couple of weeks, so that'll be interesting. I'll probably miss an episode because we'll be traveling. At any rate, marking the time as we go along here, today the answer or the question I have is, actually kind of blocked here. Basically, is it a good idea to point out errors on someone's site? Is pointing out errors on someone's site a good approach for outreach or an initial meeting? So the idea is, and I think this was asked in the context of application development, like web development or something. If you notice like problems with somebody's site, basically, should you reach out to them and say, hey, I couldn't help but notice you have some errors. Would you like me to fix those for you? Is the understanding I have of the premise here. So I will walk through my opinion on that. It isn't overly nuanced. I don't like this move personally, and I'll obviously get into a lot of detail about why I say that. It is, it has a certain kind of energy to it. I don't know about any of you out there watching, but for me, I own multiple websites and currently own one business, but have owned multiple businesses over the years. And I find myself on the receiving end of a lot of outreach. And one of the most sort of low rent types of outreach that comes in is usually SEO hucksters or pseudo hucksters that are like, there are all kinds of errors on Dead Tech, but don't worry, I'm here to white knight in and save the day. And it just has such, as the recipient, it has such low rent energy to it. I'm not a fan. Now this probably because I know an awful lot about SEO, and I am aware that the things they're calling errors are almost certainly not errors. So there is the sense that this is an attempt at manipulation, and I don't think the question asker here that we're talking about would be doing that thing. So part of that might be the patina of disingenuousness that I perceive when this form of outreach is applied to me that might not apply into this situation. So there is something maybe to be said for if you notice that somebody's site has a genuine error, like you can't log into the app or something, you might want to give them an FYI about that. But I just don't really like this as an outreach, outbound type of tactic. And I also don't like it as a sales tactic. So if you think about what you're doing here, what you're looking to do, you're going to send somebody an email and you're going to point out an error because your assumption is that they're not aware of this. So now they're going to have a problem that they didn't 5 minutes ago. I mean, they might have had the problem, but they weren't thinking about it. They didn't perceive a problem. So what you're really doing is a kind of fear-based attempt to win business. And what I mean is you're telling them, hey, you've got a problem. Don't worry, I can save you. So you're going to create a sense of fear in them and then attempt to, as part of your sales process, relieve that fear, set their mind at ease. And I might be making that out to seem a little like scummier than it is. I don't really think this is coming from a place of bad intent, but understand that is kind of the dynamics you're talking about. Now, for me personally, when I'm doing any form of sales or outreach to somebody, it's generally because I want to come from a place of help and opportunity. So I'm thinking about, we're actually doing some demand generation activities for Hit Subscribe. And when I think about the way I would reach out to prospects, or the reason I might reach out to prospects, it would be along the lines of, you have a cool looking product. I think we could probably bring a lot of people to your website with a content program and thus bring you a lot of qualified leads. So you're presenting an opportunity to the prospect, not a, it's not a threat, but you're not, hey, there's a problem and you need to stop and address it. Instead, you're appealing to more of a sense of hope than a sense of fear. That's personally how I like to approach it. I mean, I think fear can be fairly effective, but the difficulty there too is when you're pointing out problems, and I'll get into this a lot more here shortly, but when you're pointing out problems, you're trying to persuade the client to care. So let me frame it this way. This is something that's been true over the years, and it probably doesn't happen a whole lot anymore, but on my site, Dead Tech, for instance, I would fairly routinely over the course of many years get emails from people that were like, hey, I really liked this blog post that you wrote. And by the way, you probably want to know that there's a typo in, paragraph 6, like it's a good faith piece of outreach. They're not even trying to sell me anything. And as much as you might think that I would appreciate that, I don't. I don't begrudge people doing that or anything. I get where it comes from. It comes from a nice place. But here I am going through my life, and I can assure you that there are all kinds of typos on old Dead Tech blog posts. I'm sure of it. I can also assure you that I do not care at all. I don't care if some old blog post on my site has a typo. So if I'm just going about my business and I get an email from somebody that says, I really like this blog post, which is usually, kind of what they're doing. And that's a nice warm fuzzy. But then it's also like a homework assignment, like, stop what you're doing because you got a problem here and you got this typo, you should go address it. You're creating work in somebody's mind when you reach out to them in this fashion, and they might not agree with you that what you're pointing out as an error is an error. But what I'm getting at from a pure outbound lead generation and sales perspective is you're kind of creating a problem for them. You're kind of giving them homework, and that's the lead in that you're making here is here's this thing. You might not agree with me, but I believe you should think of it as a problem. And then I also believe that you should pay me to fix the problem. In sales and positioning, there's this idea of you want to be selling painkillers, not vitamins. When somebody has a really bad headache or something, say, you're somebody that gets migraines and they have those pills that can nip a migraine in the bud if you catch it in time. There's no sales job that's necessary on that situation. You feel that migraine coming on and you would absolutely plunk down money for those pills that could stave off the migraine. This is a painkiller versus a vitamin. If you're selling vitamins, this is the kind of offering where you have to convince people that they should do it. Oh, it's important, to have enough vitamin D, or you could, have all these theoretical bad consequences later. You need to make sure that you have enough calcium because in 40 years, you're going to get osteoporosis. That's a harder sales because you're not addressing any immediate perceived need that they had. This is what I often think of as the two sale problem, which is that you first have to sell them that they have a problem, and then you have to sell them your services to address this problem. And you spend a lot of capital just convincing somebody that they have a problem. So for instance, with Hit Subscribe, just as a top of mind example, if we're doing, if we're standing up a community contributor program for a client, if we're doing something that's designed to get, say, a lot of organic traffic or a community program or something, I don't look for business, and we don't look for business where we have to convince someone that content marketing is a good idea. So if somebody were to reach out and say, hey, let's schedule a sales call, but I'm not really sure about this whole content marketing thing, my take on that would be, then why do you want to talk? I'm not going to try to convince you to do content marketing if you don't believe in it. I don't know, do paid ads, do whatever you want. If you ask my opinion, I might respectfully disagree, but I'm not here to try to talk you into something you don't believe in. And that is kind of pragmatic, more so than you'd think, because usually if you convince someone to adopt a tactic or an approach that they don't really believe in, they're going to be very skeptical and they're not going to have faith. So if they're coming to us for SEO content and we really talk them into that tactic, no matter how much I explain, hey, it could take you 4 to 6 months to really start seeing results from this. After a month, the person I've talked into doing this is going to be, blowing up my inbox saying, this isn't working. I knew I shouldn't have given you money, so on and so forth. So that is kind of an inherent potential issue when you go onto somebody's site and you say, there is what I perceive to be an error going on. You're making mistakes, and I'm assuming you want to know about it. And then I'm going to convince you that you're making mistakes, and I'm going to convince you to pay me to fix them. Now, I do generally understand why people do this, especially if you're kind of new to the world of freelancing. I think that a lot of this probably has its origins in the way that we approach the job market as prospective employees. So when you're interviewing, which is a very artificial, weird, and contrived process, you put on your suit and you go and show up. And there are all manner of games that people play during that process that they're often like really proud of, something like, oh, I posted a job description for an editor, and then they deliberately insert a couple of typos, and then we'll be very proud of their process where they'll filter out anybody that is applying for the job and doesn't notice the typos on the job description page. That's what I mean about playing games. It doesn't really speak. You're not selecting for the right thing. You might just be filtering out people that are too polite to go pointing out your errors. So I think it is this world where this sort of like gamesmanship of hiring is very prevalent in the employed world. So you go out into the world as a freelancer and you think, I'm going to do the same thing. Like, I'm going to show them I'm proactive. I'm going to do this like performative error finding and show them how astute I am and smart and awesome. And, I'm making that sound like I'm not trying to be rude about it or anything. What I'm saying is I genuinely get this because that is the nature of how interviewing for jobs goes. So if you map that onto the world of freelancing, it seems like a natural thing to do. You show them that you're perceptive and that you notice errors that they didn't, and you'll take care of everything, and that you're detail oriented and all that type of stuff. And, that might work in certain contexts. Like, I'm not saying that it can't, but it's not really getting to maybe like a lot of underlying value there. And also it ignores any context that your prospect has. So if you're on their site and you notice that a page is loading slowly or whatever you're calling an error, and you reach out to them, you're kind of assuming that they're not aware of this already. You're kind of assuming that they haven't run across this and decided this is actually not, I don't even consider this an error, or this isn't important to me. I have 8 million other things. Yeah, I'm aware of it, but it's just like I can't make a business case to address this right now. There's a lot going on that when you come in hot telling them about errors that you might be completely oblivious to, and it might come off as pretty tone deaf. And this is kind of the scenario with, that I was talking about earlier with my website and like typos on old blog posts. I am fully aware that that's true, and it just isn't important to me to fix it. So if somebody's pointing that out to me, it's not a welcome message, and it's not a very persuasive one, because I might turn around and say like, well, okay, how are you going to make a business case to me that fixing typos on some 6-year-old blog post is worth literally anything to any, like, why on earth, what business case would there be for me to spend even 2 minutes going and addressing that? It's just not a good use of my time. So you can really, by sort of proclaiming things to be errors and assuming that the client isn't aware of them, making them aware, and then like trying to convince that client to pay you to address them, you're making a lot of assumptions that might make you look kind of bad as you engage this process. So it can fail to land, I think, in just so many ways. And for me personally, this is really kind of at odds with my discovery process and how I would approach things. If I were so inclined to point out an error, I might frame it in a much more, I don't know, polite or passive kind of way. Like, hey, you might well already be aware of this, but I did notice whatever. I mean, again, I probably wouldn't do this, but you can probably soften that message somewhat so that you're not presuming that they're oblivious to what you consider to be an error, or so that you're not presuming that you and them might have different concepts of how important the situation is or what have you. But really, for me, if you're going to do outreach, I would recommend looking for opportunities. So if you start to like dig into, okay, there's errors on your site, what kind of errors, and how could you potentially reframe that as opportunity instead? So like, for instance, if the website is performing really badly, like it's slow to load or something, then the actual problem going on there isn't so much that you've got an error, it's that you might be creating a bad experience for prospects, or you might be, if you're like e-commerce, you're probably literally losing money when people, abandon their cart or whatever. So that's kind of the negative side of it, but you could approach those businesses and say, I specialize in sort of specific kinds of cleanup for your, e-commerce business where I can reduce cart abandonment rates by, X, Y, and Z with performance or whatever. And it seems like that might be beneficial here, but, you tell me. So you can pretty easily, I think, reframe something like that into an opportunity for the prospect, rather than, framing it as an error, like you are wrong and here I come to save the day. So I would really think in terms of the actual outreach itself of trying to frame it as opportunity. And then when it comes to the sales process, I am a big fan and have done this for years and years and years, but I'm a big fan of doing a pretty consultative discovery-based sales process. So if you were to book a sales call with me, what I'm going to start asking you about is what your goals are, what are you trying to do? So if it's like with Hit Subscribe, it sounds like you want some content. Are you doing that for lead generation? Are you doing it for brand awareness? What makes you think that like outsourcing content is something that makes sense for you? So I ask a lot of questions rather than be prescriptive. And in fact, so much so that for me, the first call that I'll have with anybody is generally entirely discovery. I'm not trying to solve for anything. My goal is to ask them a bunch of questions to kind of interview them, to understand what's important to them, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to measure, what they think success would look like, and gather all of that. And then think about, can we help these folks? And if so, how, and what might that look like? And then I'll go off, give that some thought, put together a presentation, and then come back and say, here's what I think we should do and why. So that's actually a pretty good example, because something that'll come up a lot is if a client wants to engage, say, an SEO campaign, it is not at all unheard of for them to be incomplete or have problems that will hinder that effort. So for instance, without getting too far into the weeds, but something you're going to want if you're doing an SEO type of campaign on your site is to have a XML sitemap file that you're submitting to Google. And especially with some like bespoke CMSs or something, that might not exist. So I would look at that and say, yes, maybe we call this an error. Like there's no reason not to have a sitemap unless you really don't ever want any search traffic on your site. I think any site ought to have one. So I could go and say, like, you have an error. I've noticed you don't have a sitemap, and I could fix that for you. But like, if they're not trying for search engine traffic, it genuinely doesn't really matter. It would be better if it existed, but like going to the effort of installing the automation kind of behind the scenes to make that happen might just be a waste of their time. And until I start doing some discovery and chatting with them, I don't know whether that's true or not. So I'm not going to get into the business of being prescriptive about what they ought to do. So to kind of summarize there, for me personally, and other people's mileage may vary, I'm not a big fan of sharpshooting or pointing out errors when it comes to outreach. I'd rather point out opportunities that I perceive. And then in sales, I'm not really a fan of doing that until I establish what they're trying to do, at which point then I can weigh in and say, well, yeah, you're coming to me for search traffic, and you have these things that are going to make that goal harder that we should address. Now it's like I'm, genuinely being asked for an opinion and expertise because they're coming and looking for help with, getting traffic to their site. So framing it as opportunity in any outreach that we're doing, and then contextualizing with discovery to really try to get at what somebody's trying to do before I start prescriptively making recommendations. I am really not a fan of giving anybody advice absent context. I always kind of want as much context as humanly possible, because they may be perfectly aware of something that I would consider a mistake, and they may not care. They may have said, here is my list of 800 priorities, and this is number 794. So yeah, could be better, but that's life. There's all sorts of reasons that you might not be aware of that, errors exist in their world. So I wouldn't presume about any of that. So hopefully all of that is, potentially interesting or helpful in some capacity. And this is one where I have a strong opinion on this, but I don't know that there's really a right answer. I mean, maybe people going out and like finding and pointing out errors has a rich history of leading to business in certain contexts. I genuinely don't know. It's just not a look that I particularly like. I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't really want it done to me. So I have, my opinions on the subject of how I personally would or would not go about this type of thing. So hopefully that makes sense, and I will catch you all next time.